Right now, you're doing something so ordinary you've completely stopped noticing it. You're reading, or maybe someone is speaking into your ear. Either way, a string of tiny symbols or sounds is landing in your brain and turning instantly, effortlessly into meaning. You're not thinking about how it's happening, you're just understanding. But here's the thing that should stop you cold. This ability you're using right now, this thing you've done every single day of your life, took at least 135,000 years to build. And before it existed, there was nothing. No stories, no plans, no names for the people you loved. How on earth did the first word ever get said? Language is the most invisible technology in human history. Unlike fire, or a spear, or a clay pot, you can't hold it, you can't dig it up. And yet it changed everything. Because before language arrived, your ancestors were locked inside their own skulls, capable of feeling, capable of seeing, but unable to truly share any of it. The moment language appeared, a wall came down. Suddenly, one person's thought could live inside another person's mind. That's not just communication. That's a kind of immortality. Here's a fact that might rearrange something in your brain. Every single human being alive on Earth today speaks a language. Not some humans, not most humans, all of them. Even the most isolated groups ever discovered by anthropologists, communities that had been separated from the rest of the world for tens of thousands of years, had rich, complex, fully formed languages. This was the key piece of logic that led MIT professor Shigeru Miyagawa and his team to a stunning conclusion in 2025. If every group that ever branched off from the original human family tree has language, then language had to exist before they split, and the first split happened around 135,000 years ago, which means you were born into a species that has been talking for 135,000 years. Let that number breathe for just a moment. But here's where it gets interesting. Most people assume language started with speech, with sound, with the voice, with a caveman grunting out the first word. That's what you picture, isn't it? A grunt around a fire. But that's not what the evidence suggests at all. Researchers believe that before spoken words, there was something else, something symbolic. Deep in a cave on the southern coast of South Africa called Blombos Cave, archaeologists found pieces of red ochre, a kind of natural iron oxide pigment, carved with deliberate, repeating geometric patterns, crosshatches, lines, shapes that mean nothing by accident. These weren't random scratches. They were found in layers dated to 75,000 and even 100,000 years ago. And here's why they matter to language. To make a symbol that means something to another person, you need grammar of the mind. You need to understand that a mark can stand for an idea. That's not just drawing, that is the root of language. Now here's where most people think they know the answer, and where the story shatters. You've probably been taught that humans developed language because we have a special vocal anatomy, a descended larynx, sitting lower in our throats than any other animals. And that is real. As you grew from an infant into a child, your larynx actually dropped in your throat, opening up a wider vocal chamber that lets you produce hundreds of distinct sounds. No other primate goes through that transformation. But what nobody tells you is the price you paid for it. Because of that descended larynx, you are the only mammal on the planet that can choke to death on food. Your food and your air share the same passage, and that requires a tiny flap called your epiglottis to perform a split-second maneuver every time you swallow, to prevent you from dying. Choking is one of the leading causes of accidental death in humans. Your cat cannot choke that way. Your dog cannot. You gave up physical safety for the ability to talk. Then there's the genetic evidence, and it rewrites the story from the inside out. Buried deep in your DNA is a gene called FOXP2. Scientists call it the language gene, not because it's the only gene involved, but because when it's damaged, the ability to control the precise, rapid movements needed for speech breaks down entirely. People with a disrupted FOXP2 gene struggle to move their mouths and tongues in the coordinated sequences that speech requires. What makes this extraordinary is that the human version of FOXP2 appears in both modern humans and in Neanderthals, our closest extinct cousins, suggesting that the genetic machinery for language was already being assembled at least 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, before we even fully split from Neanderthals. The hardware was being built far earlier than anyone imagined. Pause here for a moment. Think about what this means. The body was physically rebuilding itself, rewiring genes, restructuring throats, rewiring brains to make language possible. This wasn't accidental. This was relentless biological pressure toward one destination, the ability to connect one mind to another. So what ended the ancient oral world? What moment changed the relationship between humans and language forever? It happened around 3200 before Christ in the sun-baked flatlands of ancient Mesopotamia in what is now southern Iraq. A group of Sumerian merchants, needing to track grain and livestock, began pressing a pointed reed stylus into wet clay. The marks were simple at first, just tallies, just records. But within centuries, those marks evolved into cuneiform, the world's first true writing system, from spoken words to clay tablets, from voices around a fire to symbols pressed in silence. What had once lived only inside the breath, the throat, and the memory of human beings was now captured, stored, frozen. For the first time in 135,000 years of human language, you no longer had to remember, and that changed what it meant to speak. Because here's what we lost. For over 100,000 years, the entire accumulated knowledge of your species lived in the mouths of living people. Elders were libraries. Stories were the software that preserved survival knowledge, social rules, emotional truth, all held together by the miracle of human memory and the warmth of a human voice. When writing emerged, the pressure to remember began to lift. And as that pressure lifted, something extraordinary quietly faded. The near superhuman capacity for oral memory that your ancestors possessed. Ancient Greek poets could recite tens of thousands of lines of verse from memory alone. The Vedic priests of India passed down thousands of years of scripture verbally, not a word written, not a word changed. That version of you, the remembering, reciting, storytelling you, has been quietly receding ever since someone pressed a reed into clay 5,000 years ago. So here's the question that should make you sit differently in your seat. What if your frustration with memory, your sense that you can't hold on to ideas long enough, your feeling that information slides away before you can use it? What if that isn't a personal failure? What if it's your ancient mind straining against a system it was never fully designed for? Written language is brilliant, but your brain was built for something older, richer, more alive. It was built for the fire, the voice, the face, the breath. It was built for 135,000 years of oral reality, and it's only had 5,000 to adjust to the page. The next time you forget something you just read or struggle to recall a conversation word for word, try not to judge yourself. Close your eyes and imagine this instead. A fire flickering in the dark of a South African cave 75,000 years ago. Hands pressing marks into red ochre. A voice, your ancestor's voice, carrying a story across the smoke. No page, no screen, just sound, turning into meaning, turning into memory, turning into you. The first word was spoken long before anyone could write it down, and somehow, impossibly, it reached you.